Pikachu? I don't know.
Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every week to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace, and its absence, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We are glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Well, you might as well face it. I'm addicted to spuds. I've churned butter once or twice living in an Amish paradise. Like a surgeon. I think I'm a clone now. What am I listing, everyone? RJ?
Well, I know what you're listing. Weird Al, baby.
Weird Al. Today, I want, but after we check in,
of course, your favorite is Eat It. Let's just say it. Eat it. Just eat it.
Yeah.
What about Fat? The bad parody.
Very nice.
We're going to talk at length about Weird Al today because you've heard from some folks saying that maybe not every episode should be completely Corona focused, and I take that to be a challenge. That you might be sorry what you wished for, but before
so we're going Weird Al.
We're going Weird Al Yankovic. But the two of you, we're in Weird Al's universe. It feels like right now, not in always a good way. It's not UHF. How's it going? Before we jump in,
I mean, I really do. I was saying this to you guys before we got on. I really do feel like everyone is falling apart more now. Like I definitely feel that way. Like the first couple weeks, we kind of like looked on the bright side and family time and all this stuff, and moments of that are still there, but it's definitely settling in more, I think, with our kids. It's settling in more with my college students. I don't know. I feel like we're all there's taking a lot of grace, a lot of patience, and a lot of just remembering that, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're all functioning at like a mental health 5 right now. That's just kind of where I'm finding my peace. You know what I mean? Oh, happy Easter too.
He has risen.
Hallelujah.
Oh, yes. It was definitely one of the strangest Easters on record.
Yes.
RJ, how was your Easter?
It was good, actually. I'm doing well. I pre-recorded our Easter service, worked really hard on it, but I was really happy actually with how it turned out. And yeah, so did that, and then had a congregational Zoom meeting, which was fun, that a bunch of people showed up for, and people were wearing their hats, and we had a number of people hid little Easter eggs in their video frame, which was kind of fun to find. But I feel like in spite of everything, we had a good Holy Week and a good Easter, and just kind of taking a little bit of a day of rest today and probably tomorrow. And but generally, we're hanging in there. We're doing okay. Yeah.
We just come to the end of our kids' spring break. Feels
Spring
like
break
a particular
2020.
cold comfort right now. I mean, all the administrators at the school through their online Zoom stuff, and they're being they're champions. They're incredible right now, and their hands are tied in a lot of different ways, but they're really doing a lot with what they can. But you say, I hope you had a great spring break. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? They've been out of school for a month. God, I mean, how was your spring break?
What did you do that was so different? Did you try full fat whole milk, or like what? How did you mix it up?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, someone was asking us how it's going in our house, and it's getting ripe. That's all I can say. It feels like you hit the wall every day. You kind of have this Groundhog Day existence where oh my gosh, another day. Even Easter.
Time for a harvest.
What's going on?
I don't know about you guys, but it feels like there's no such thing as a day off.
Oh,
because just
1,000,000%.
every single day because if you're home, you can't go anywhere. Like what I like to do on a day off, if I can, if I've got the kids around, I'll take Marshall to the zoo. We'll go to the playground. We'll go to the dinosaur museum. And now it's just like there's how many times can we scooter around our block? Like I just don't even know. How many times can I play basketball and kick, or kick the soccer ball or something? It's like, well, I might as well work. I might as well just be
Yeah.
working on something. So it's weird.
Yeah, but then it's hard to have a day on. It's just surreal, and I mean, I feel like at moments you caught me on a moment today where I'm feeling slightly more at peace. And yesterday was Easter. You know, when I always find sometimes with Easter and the almost spiritual injunction to be joyful in my own heart kind of produces its opposite. Even though it was beautiful outside, and I just start to feel a little bit despondent by about 4 o'clock or even 2 o'clock. But today, one of the things that's made today such a good day is reading this ridiculously long profile on Weird Al Yankovic. Now,
Yes.
those of you who grew up in the 80s, 90s, or in fact, he is one of a very few artists who've had a top 10 hit in 4 decades. Sam Anderson, the writer of Boomtown, wrote an incredible profile of Weird Al and his enduring appeal, which, when you think about it, is almost weirder than his persona. And, you know, most of us, at least I remember him from, he's the guy who did all of the really silly, almost always food-related, but not always food-related, spoofs of popular songs. And he became a cultural force. Now, Sam Anderson jumps into this thing by talking about going to a Weird Al concert. He said the crowd, thinking that for a parody artist, no one would come to a concert at a large stadium. This is what he says. He said the crowd was rolling through tantric nerdgasms, sustained explosions of belonging and joy. It felt it felt religious. Near the end of the show, during the chorus of Amish Paradise, as the entire stadium started swinging its arms in rhythm, I unexpectedly found myself near tears. Weird Al was dressed in a ridiculous black suit with a top hat and a long fake beard, and he was rapping about churning butter and raising barns, and everyone was singing along. I could feel deep pools of solitary childhood emotion, loneliness, affection, vulnerability, joy, beginning to stir inside me, beginning to trickle out and flow into this huge common reservoir. Weird Al had pulled off a strange emotional trick. He had brought the isolated energy of all our tiny rooms into this one big public space. When he left the stage, we stomped for more, and he came back out and played Yoda, his classic revision of the Kinks' Lola, and then he left again, and I decided that this was the single best performance of any kind I had ever seen in my life. Weird Al Yankovic was a full-on rock star, a legitimate performance monster. And he was more than just funny. Even as a child, I understood on some intuitive level that Weird Al was not only the Shakespeare of terrible food puns or an icon of anti-style, but a spiritual technician doing important work down in the engine room of the American soul. What Weird Al parody did was enact a tiny revolution. It took the whole glamorous architecture of American mainstream cool, Michael Jackson's otherworldly dance moves, Madonna's sexual taboos, and extracted all of the coolness. Into that void, Weird Al inserted the least cool person in the world, himself, and by proxy, all the rest of us weirdos, along with our uncool lives. Andy Samberg, the actor and member of the comedy group Lonely Island, told me that he grew up having Weird Al dance parties with his family. Each new generation of younger kids is like, wait, this can exist? Samberg said. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's a Weird Al obsessive, credits Yankovic as an influence on Hamilton. He once lip-synced all of Taco Grande, a Mexican food-themed parody of the 1990 hit Rico Suave, in front of his 6th grade class. Michael Schur, the guy behind The Good Place and Parks and Rec, he's quoted as saying, it's a truly American thing to be like, get over yourself. Everybody get over yourselves. Madonna, get over yourself. Kurt Cobain, get over yourself. Eminem, get over yourself. No one gets to be that important in America. And he keeps going. Among the big personalities of the Los Angeles comedy world, his quiet decency is legendary. He is so incredibly nice, Samberg, among many others, told me. He is the nicest person you will ever meet, exactly what you're dreaming he'll be like. No one has ever heard Weird Al raise his voice in anger. He doesn't swear. When a script comes to him with a bad word in it, he politely asks for revisions. We'll stop there. I want to go into it. What I discovered reading this midway through is that with the way that Sam Anderson is talking about Weird Al is the way that we have been talking about Dolly Parton on this podcast.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a minister. And
Conduit of grace.
he's a conduit of grace. And if you can get to the link that we'll put in the show notes, I promise, they did a call for all these fans of Weird Al to come for a photo shoot, and like 400 fans showed up dressed as Weird Al. These are young people, old people, men, women, folks from India, folks from Mexico, little kids, babies, married couples. It is the most incredible photo you've ever seen, and but he is a conduit of when we talk about when Christians talk about outsiders and sort of love for those on the margins. Sometimes that's just a lip service thing. Weird Al is actually on the margins, and not the cool nerds, not the nerds like the sort of the models who say, "Oh, I'm such a nerd," but the actual awkward, pimply, cannot talk to people of the opposite sex, genuine nerds. Bedwetters. And in fact, he goes on to describe how Weird Al, Sam Anderson talks about how he was a bedwetter as a kid. And Weird Al, it originally was an insult. He was called Weird Al at college. And he ended up owning it in this beautiful way. I'm going to get to the end when I talk about his tour. But before then, what do you think, RJ? What's going through your mind?
A lot of things. I think it's a real encouragement to just love what you love and admit what you love, that probably the best thing you like is actually the worst thing you like. I think about my unadulterated love for Tangled and other kind of Disney princess movies and the sort of things that I don't really want to admit necessarily, the kind of things that actually do make me cry. And that sort of, we use this word abreaction quite a bit, that what is it about those things that feed us, that nourish us, even though they shouldn't, or we'd be sort of embarrassed to share that with somebody else. And so, I've never been a huge Weird Al fan, although I do love UHF. Like, I own UHF, and I've watched it many times. That movie is, I think, really funny and pretty incredible.
It's got Kramer in it.
It does, that's right, and Victoria Jackson and a whole bunch of other sort of B-list movie stars, C-list movie stars. But just to give yourself the freedom to love what it is that you actually love, because that's where if you can tell that story, I mean, maybe this is for preachers, really. If you can tell the story and connect with why it is what you love that you actually love, and why it speaks to you, why it feeds you, why it heals you, you might actually be able to communicate with another human being. There's something about the personal and the particular that ends up being very universal in a strange way. And then just to make the connection more explicit between what he's talking about and between Christianity, it just makes me think of what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1 when he says, God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. How he says, consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise, not many were powerful, but God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, chose what is weak to shame the strong, chose what is low and despised, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast. So this idea of...
chose what is weird to shame the normal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Chose the bedwetters, chose the weird, chose the outcast, the 16-year-old pale, scrawny college freshman. It was very powerful. Because again, I don't know if I necessarily connect with Weird Al, but I don't know if I would allow myself to connect with Weird Al, because it seems so frivolous. Like, how could you spend your money on a CD that's just a gag, is a spoof and not serious? And yet it's beautiful. The idea of these people who find tremendous hope and belonging at Weird Al Yankovic concerts makes me want to go. It makes me want to go to one and experience it for myself,
Sarah, what comes to your mind?
I mean, I was definitely raised in a household with a lot of Weird Al. So I'm.
Of course
I
you
mean,
were.
You say that like
Of course you
weary.
were.
I just he's in this category. I was just sitting here thinking of all the things that I was exposed to as a kid that were weird, like Weird Al, MST3K, Mystery Science Theater, Kids in the Hall, PG Wodehouse was what my dad read to me every night.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Another layer.
And
Another layer to the onion.
Another layer to the onion. and I think about like how weird we were as a family. Just we were so weird in Mississippi. And I have friends who've known me my whole life who grew up in my neighborhood who have since said to me, you guys were always the weird family that our parents were like in kitchens, like, we don't know about that family. You know, I mean, we were literally the Taylor Fergusons because my mom didn't change her last name when she got married. Like, just that was so weird, you know? And then it was like, you know, they both were from home and the sense of humor obviously was like very specific. And like, I just try to picture what my parents would have been like at like neighborhood parties. And I'm like, I don't know. There's this story. This is like not even relevant, but there's this story about, I was one of the it was a New Year's Eve party they had at the club and like everybody's down there and, you know, partying. And my dad's not he loves parties. He's not a drinker. And he felt like my mom was down there too long. So he just called the cops and said that the party was noisy, even though it wasn't. So they shut the party down. Like, they were just, and as an adult, I'm so thankful for it. As a kid, it was hard because it was like, why do I know these things, right? Like, why do we have these magazines and these books sitting around? Why do I know these things? And then I get made fun of in class because I ask these really nerdy questions, or I'm like really interested in something everyone else thinks is lame. And I can remember saying to my dad one time, why are we like this? And he said, because we didn't raise you to fit in. And like, that's a thing I think about a lot in raising children now. And, you know, our kids are such a product of our genetics and they're so quirky and funny and, you know, have these really specific like interests and they both overshare. And I mean, Annie today, we had a friend over for Easter lunch and 6 feet away in the backyard, which I know everyone's like, that's not good enough. But look, he lives by himself and we love him and it's not your backyard, whatever. We're doing the best we can with this. Mm-hmm. So we had him over and Annie was like really pissed at us yesterday because it was like a holiday day. So like you do the lunch at 2 p.m. kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So she was on her kindergarten Zoom this morning and she goes, and that her teacher was like, how was Easter? Remember, Annie's at the church school where her dad's a priest, right? She's like, how was everyone's Easter? And everyone's like, it's amazing. I love Jesus so much. And then Annie got on. She's like, Mr. Joseph came over and no one fed me lunch. I was like, oh my God, she's our kid. I don't know. There's something for me, like having been raised in that kind of culture, like it is hard as a kid, but it's also really beautiful as an adult that I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't be as like free as I am if I hadn't been raised like listening to Weird Al and like seeing the kids in the hall, you know? I don't know. There's just something really like, there's a gift there that like I'm only realizing as I become an adult.
I think that's really well put. I've felt the same way. I mean, I was the kid who my dad wasn't like the other dads, you know. Just
right.
And anyone who knows my father at all, they know that that's true. He was not
right.
He was such a incredible role model in so many ways, but not in the sort of teach you to throw the football kind of way or be stoic in any way.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like that stuff is just it was authentic to him. It wasn't like he was trying to be weird. Sure. It was just who he was. And I get more and more grateful for it as I get older. I want to read to you the part about his ministry in action because it struck me as this. It honestly is enough to kind of make a person cry. And to really illustrate what grace in practice looks like. It looks like a Weird Al meet and greet. And this is what they talk about. He goes on tour with Weird Al, and he says Weird Al really stayed to himself for most of the tour, except for late at night, after the shows, when he would interact with fans in an elaborate VIP session. Photos, autographs, chats. Yankovic would do basically anything fans wanted. He would mug for the camera or flex like a bodybuilder or sign people's arms. He signed posters, cassette tapes, action figures, accordions, spatulas, glow-in-the-dark snorkels.
Spatula City.
I saw him sign a package of bologna and an exact replica of a Star Wars stormtrooper helmet. These were not autograph hounds, but true devotees, exactly the kinds of people Yankovic placed at the center of his songs. Nerds, misfits, weirdos. They were less interested in a photo op than in a sort of spiritual transfer. Most of all, the fans thanked Weird Al. They thanked him for his music, for not dying of heat stroke on stage, for helping them survive cancer, for helping them survive their mother's cancer. I got introduced to your music when I was going through struggles in my life, said a young balding man wearing a brown suit, and the word struggles was surrounded on all sides by an unfathomable gulp of feeling. You helped me pull through. Weird Al listened with deep eye contact. Thank you, he said. That means a lot to me. Thank you for all the joy you bring to the world, said a woman in Minnesota. Thank you for making my best times brighter with your songs, said a man in North Dakota. Thank you for letting us all be ourselves. Thank you for you being you. Weird Al's bond with his fans is atomic. He will stop and speak with them anywhere, at airports, outside the tour bus, for so long that it becomes a logistical problem. The fans approach him like a guru, and Weird Al responds with sweet, open, validating energy. Joel Miller, the friend who defended Yankovic from college bullies, said the relationship between Weird Al and his hardcore fans is deeply personal. He's giving them validation, he told me. They feel a kindred spirit. When they're at his concerts, they are in a safe space. They're able to be stupid or outlandish or whatever exactly as they want, and nobody judges them. In fact, it's the opposite. People appreciate them for what they are, not for what they aren't. The connection is so deep that it is more like a merging. And after a while, it struck me that Weird Al has basically spent his whole life making his music for exactly these people, which is to say, his childhood self. For many decades, he has been trying to delight Alfred Yankovic, the bright, painfully shy kid who grew up alone in his tiny bedroom. For the benefit of that lonely boy, he reshaped the whole world of pop culture. His ridiculous music sent out a pulse, a signal, and these were the people it drew, the odd, the left out. A crowd of friends for that lonely kid. As I watched him with his fans, sometimes I felt as if Weird Al was multiplying all around me, multiplying inside of me. We were one crowd, united in isolation, together in a great collective loneliness that once you recognized it, once you accepted it, felt right on the brink of being healed. I mean, that was not what I was expecting for an article about Weird Al. I was...
You know what this makes me think of, though, that I have to say is it makes me think that we really have to respect what our children love. Like, one thing that's come out of this time together is, like, and we've known this about our son for a while, is that he loves Pokemon, like loves Pokemon. And it's so, if you've ever watched Pokemon, it's so freaking intense that, like, sometimes I'm like, all right, we gotta take a break. Like, there's a lot of like loud, high pitched crying, and yeah. And because if you ever watch these little animals and they're really loud, and like there's these Japanimation women with like big boobs and small waists that, like, I'm not sure that's a good image, you know, it's like a whole thing. And so during this time that we've all been home, we've like let each other pick out movies, and he was like, I want to show you guys a Pokemon movie. Like, we've always avoided it. He's like, I want you to see what a Pokemon movie is like. And like, what I didn't realize is, like, the main character, I can't remember his name.
Pikachu?
No, it's his, like, it's, like, the main trainer.
I don't know.
Like, part of his deal is that he's, like, really, really close with his mom. Like, his mom says stuff to him like, you're my whole world. I mean, it's really melodramatic, you know? But, like, we were watching with Neil, and, like, when that part happened, he came over and sat by me and grabbed my hand, and I was like, this means, like, this is speaking to him emotionally on such a deep level. Like, it would be awful to not let him have this, and to not, like, watch it with him, and to not... So, like, yesterday I sat down with a Pokemon book. That kid has not learned any third grade math from me, but I can tell you about water-type Pokemons now, because I was like, I'm gonna try to figure this out, because I love him and he loves this, you know?
Incarnational ministry.
I know. That's as close as I get. But I do think there's something about, like, what, I mean, RJ, is totally what you said at the beginning. Like, it's like, you should love what you love, you know? And as parents, I think sometimes our tendency is to really kind of steer our kids away from different things for whatever weird anxieties we have that we're totally projecting onto them, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, like, what is it? Like, tell me why you love this. Like, tell me why this thing, like, moves you. I don't know.
No, it's always the question is, why do you like the music you listen to? You like, not what should you listen to? That's that's a secondary, possibly a tertiary question.
Right.
The real perceptive, gracious question is that what is it that's speaking to you about this? Even though, because to me, it looks ridiculous and or just histrionic, or that I watched Pokemon with my kids a couple times and I just had to leave the room. It was so intense.
Oh, it's really intense. But it's like a telenovela.
There's a
only
connection
Japanese.
happening.
Yeah.
RJ, I cut
But
you
hey,
off.
I mean, but John Wick is no problem. I mean, just comparison. I'll watch John Wick for days. But Sarah, it did strike me. Pokemon Go is maybe the best social distancing activity I can think of. Just like take a walk, keep your distance, and catch them all.
Pokemon people have been social distancing for a while
They
now.
have been. Well, I gotta say, I love. I'm thinking about it. Of course, I think about what he said for myself, and thinking about Weird Al Yankovic as a model to preachers. And I do think if you can preach to your childhood self, that's
so
about
good, RJ.
that's about the best you can possibly do, right? And actually, at the end of the day, honestly, that's all I'm ever actually doing.
Right.
Is I'm saying, what does Jesus have to say today for my childhood, scared, lonely, ashamed self?
Yeah.
So I think that's something I will take away. Anyway.
Yeah, well, no, what a relief it is to find another one of these cultural icons who doesn't really disappoint. We have Dolly Parton in that. We have probably Fred Rogers is in that. And not to say these people aren't human, but
the Holy Trinity.
I know, I'm here for that.
Al Yankovic.
Dolly, Fred, and Al.
I think not who anyone would have maybe thought when you're growing up, but these are the... and I think about really intense fan communities because I'm a part of a couple of them. And they're not all created equal, because some of them, and especially in the age of the internet, like fandom has become like affinity groups, like these intense internet communities of fans.
Purity spirals?
They become purity spirals a lot of times. It starts to be a place where ceases to be a place where you finally belong and becomes a place where you better belong,
Have to prove yourself even more than you did before.
And Weird Al, just by being starting at the point of such oddball, his love of accordions and polka music. I mean, that's how they talk about his sort of the road to Damascus moment in Weird Al life is like when he performed with his accordion and did like
Cal Poly. Oh my God.
10 minutes.
So great.
A 10-minute accordion medley of like greatest every song ever written. And the place just went electric. And I thought to myself, that's a beautiful... Talk about left-handed power, and
amazing.
And I also know, by the way, I mean, I could insert this in here. I think it's somewhat public knowledge, but Weird Al is a Christian, and
I didn't
is
know
he?
that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Well,
are you really?
I'm positive. I say this
my
because
gosh, they are the Holy Trinity. I was kidding, but now it's true.
No, I say this because and silliness. I think it's different than absurdity. Silliness itself is such a virtue, and I find it to be a spiritual virtue, and maybe not the one.
It was saving us right now.
Yeah, it may not be the one that's easiest to, as we've seen, it's kind of tough to talk about, but it's important to talk
Foolishness.
about.
Foolishness. Silliness. It's the same thing.
Well, when I wrote this book about music called A Mess of Help, which I loved, which was very much an outpouring of my own adolescent and obsessions with music and connections, sort of, stuff. And it's really a spiritual testimony of a book. But someone came to one of those book signings who said, are you a fan of Weird Al Yankovic? And I said, well, I mean, isn't everybody? But I don't, nothing beyond the big hits. And I think I had last checked in around A White and Nerdy was his song. Or Amish Paradise was such the kind of last gasp for a lot of us. But she basically wanted to say she was a super fan and would follow Weird Al around the country and she wrote me an email a couple weeks later saying that she'd given Weird Al a copy of my book.
Whoa.
And I mean, who knows if you ever read it, but she said, please pray for Al. He's on the road. He's away from his church. And I know that he's with a lot of people that really, to whom he means a lot. And he means a lot to me. And somehow this strange fellowship, this constellation of saints had included Weird Al, and I thought to myself, if this is the only reason I wrote this book about
That's
rock and
amazing.
roll, well then that I know that Weird Al has touched a copy of it, um, and
Wow.
has spoken to, because when this woman talked to me about him, and she was maybe middle aged, maybe sort of later middle aged, and she almost got tears in her eyes talking about him. Again, Sarah, it's the way that you talk about Dolly Parton.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, there's something more going on with Weird Al than I ever realized. And so to hear it put in this way, and to know that he's wholesome and silly, but deeply connected to people on the level of their mother's cancer or
Hmm.
whatever it is, and he doesn't sort of shy away from that. I don't know. All of it existing at once is a gift was a gift to me this week in the midst of feeling isolated and feeling like you're in a room listening to maybe your kids, but also your own little fixations. And here's Weird Al bringing us all together. So maybe the Holy Spirit was working through Weird Al this week, and I feel like I want to watch
So good.
UHF again. Remember, he gets to drink from the fire hose.
We don't need no stinking badgers.
I'm obsessed with how long we've been talking about Weird Al. Like, I like that people are like, hey, you can talk about something other than Corona. And we're like, cool. So every other episode, we're just going to talk about Weird Al.
This is the Dave Zoll Memorial episode, but I'm totally here for it. I'm
Sorry,
loving it.
I felt like
no,
it was
I
a
love
risk.
it, Dave. It's perfect. I
Okay,
love
well,
the article.
moving on, we're going to talk
Yeah.
about something that Amanda McMillan, who's been contributing to the blog quite a bit recently, and she's a minister here at Christ Church. She's on our staff. She did a devotional for our the Grace in the Time of Corona series we've been doing on Instagram and Facebook that everyone should check out. She wrote a blog post about how I need grace during Corona, but I'm also going to need it afterward. She says, lately I've been doing a lot more phone scrolling than I'd care to admit. And a theme I've been seeing a lot of, among other less savory, anxiety-producing ones, is grace. It has surprised me and encouraged me. Some of this pep talk going around the internet looks like this. You aren't working from home. You're trying to hold down a job at home in the midst of a global pandemic and also homeschooling. There is a difference. You don't have to make this the most productive time of your life. You are doing the best you can. These are the refrains of grace she's seeing on the internet in sort of first secular sort of voices. No one cares if you read those classic novels or not, or if you read anything at all. Watch a show about
Yes,
a
Sarah.
man and his unhealthy obsession with tigers instead.
Yes.
Screw sourdough and homemade kombucha and homemade pasta, anything homemade really. Don't cook, order takeout, be someone's hero. And the bar for your dressing yourself can be very low. Wear pajamas all day long, every day. Maybe change your shirt for a Zoom call, but that's it. Then Amanda writes, the skeptic in me, though, has one question to this gracious internet refrain. Am I also allowed to not read the classics and never make kombucha when this pandemic is gone? Or is this a corona-only grace we're talking about? Because I'm going to not want to do anything productive afterward, too. This is my wonderful, virtuous nature, after all. Pre, during, and post-pandemic, I will always be most gloriously me. And I have a sinking feeling it'll be full steam ahead New Year's resolutions for our world as soon as it's an appropriate time to bring it up. So we are receiving a gracious word and maybe giving ourselves a break because our world is a mess. But of course, our world was a mess before December 2019 when the virus was born, and it will be a mess long after. There have always been the exhausted, lonely, terribly anxious, and dying. We need a gracious word to do more than just change our to-do list for the day from a productive and glamorous 8 hours to Tiger King every night and greasy hair, although that is very nice too. Thank you. That struck a pastoral chord with me. We have celebrated on this podcast these sort of gracious words saying, you don't have to make this productive. You are not a teacher. Just get through the day. And I think we've all been encouraged by that. But then, as Amanda says, does it come to an end when if this ever comes to an end? Then we just need to get back out there, or are we seeing a glimpse of something deeper and more true or more important? I don't know. What do you think of that?
I mean, Dave, one thing you said, I think in the first episode we recorded after all this has happened was like that everyone's doing it wrong, which is something I think about a lot and like take a lot of comfort in when I'm like, is this going well? Are we doing this the right way? I do think it's interesting. I love that she wrote about this. I do think it's really interesting that people are talking about like so it's so hard to say this without sounding condescending, but especially people who have all been like, "You need to get out there and do more," are the people who are like, "Let's all forgive each other and be gracious." I mean, there's especially sort of the left part of the church that often is the part that's like telling us we've got to do more and work harder and be better and serve our fellow human being, and now there's like this, oh, just take it easy on yourself and your mental health and wellness. I'm like, girl, my mental health and wellness was not good a year ago, but you were telling me I need to be down at the food bank every day and worried about the healthcare crisis. So, like, there's part of me that hopes that, like, maybe a couple folks hold on to that because, I think we all need it. I think this is a really good word that we need to be thinking about because she's totally right. Like, these think pieces that have come out that have said, we all need to like rethink our capitalist ways and we all need, once this is over, don't just go back to the way things were. I'm like, honey, 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 honey. People are going to be running at breakneck speed to get back to the way things were. Like, when people write stuff like that, I just think, you are so out of touch with people's low anthropology. It kills me. And so I think what I want to say is I think that's impossible. But what I love what Amanda writes here is maybe it would be possible for us to say it was really nice when I was able to give myself some grace, when I was able to get some grace from maybe my neighbors, maybe my family, that I couldn't do all the things. And it would be nice to hold on to some of that. I mean, I don't want to like turn down a bunch of speaking engagements on this podcast, but I got to say, we were going to do sabbatical and I needed all the Benjamins. And so I would signed up to do all these speaking engagements in May and they've all been canceled. And I'm so glad. And part of me is like, maybe I should have said no to those things to begin with. So it's, I do think I think there's so much individually, and that's why I love what she's writing about, that we can think about for ourselves, and for those that we love. But I mean, girl, we all gonna be at the Target as soon as this is over. You know that. I'm buying shit. I'm gonna have throw pillows, new lamps. I ordered a cover for my chair the other day. I mean, like, we're gonna be back at it as soon as we can be, so.
No longer spray painting things, I see.
Well, I mean, that's just because I'm too scared to go to the hardware store to buy spray paint. But I'm thinking if I can get chalk paint in, I'm doing my dining room table. RJ.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's right. It strikes me that it's not about external voices. It's about internal voices, right? That the three of us all have the blessing and the curse to some degree. We're pretty much all kind of our own bosses, But as someone once said, like, yeah, I'm my own boss, but I've got a really hard boss.
Yeah,
like I've got a boss that doesn't really let me off the hook much, and so I haven't really had the time to read a lot of think pieces or to. I'm not quite as engaged on social media as you are, Sarah, but I will say I'm not hearing that externally. I'm just more hearing it internally,
sure.
Right? The need to keep on going, to do my best, to serve my people, to to try to sort of get through and sort of lead my congregation through this difficult time, and doing the best that I can. And then also, when you run out of steam or you find yourself at a low ebb, you're like, oh wait, it's not all up to me. Like there is a God in heaven. The kingdom does move forward. This is not a surprise to him. Like he's got things under control even when I don't. Yeah, it's all from inside. It's not from outside. I shouldn't say
RJ,
all. I'd say 80%. 80 to 90% inside.
I just think that's like so perceptive. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that it's so internal, and that, I mean, I kind of need to hear what Amanda's saying for myself, just like right now, because it's just like, I mean, this past week, I had the grand idea that our church should give everybody. I told Dave, I told you about this, Easter in an envelope, and so
I saw it. I saw it on Facebook. I was very jealous. I was like, "Those Holy Spirit won Easter.
So let
You
me
guys
tell
won
you
Easter."
how ugly this past week was. So it's 350 households, and and my friend came over, and we both put on those masks and gloves to pack them. And it was so hot that we'd stripped down to not our underwear, but almost standing in my kitchen doing this together. And all I could think about was those gangster movies where women are packing cocaine in their bra and panties.
It was like New
And
Jack
I was
City,
like,
pretty much
Happy
New Jack
Easter,
City.
Holy
Yeah,
Spirit.
yeah.
Like, it's just like, I mean, I need to hear this because RJ, that thing about kind of you're your own boss, but it's a tough boss is like, whew, it's a good word.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do want to celebrate, or at least note, that we are getting these sort of injunctions. It's okay if you're not producing. It's okay if these things, and
No, it's not.
at the same time, it's these churches are still raising budgets, so are nonprofits and all that stuff. And
Oh my
those
gosh,
voices are in the
yes.
back of your head, and But what Amanda says is that the deeper truth that this is revealing about not just our world or the nature of life, but our own personal drives and things like that, and that we need something more than just a shuffle of priorities. You can tell she's a preacher if you read the end of it, and so yeah, I needed that myself, knowing that we are just I do feel that this is a spiritually a tremendously ripe time. I think that people are asking questions. There is a sort of things are closer to the surface, or at least they have been, with uncertainty, with death, with real questions of life. And so you want to sort of maximize, and then again optimize, I guess. And then all of a sudden you're back into the very thing that you're trying to offer a relief to, a word of grace to. So. I thought another thing that appeared on our site this week, it certainly has been inspiring our writers on Mockingbird. Those of you who aren't checking out our blog on a daily basis are missing out. Todd Brewer wrote something about lament, because there's, in the midst of this crisis, there's been, rightfully so, an uptick in people praising or trying to reclaim the language of lament as something that Christians and just Judeo-Christians are really have access to, in terms of just asking why. The most high profile of these was N.T. Wright wrote something for Time magazine. According to N.T. Wright, Todd writes, "Lament is the best resource we have in these dire moments. For Wright, what Christianity offers is not an explanation of the meaning of the pandemic, or even a comforting sign of relief, but it simply offers an avenue to ask God why, and to not get an answer, to, quote, wait without hope." Now, Todd is picking a bone with this idea. He says, in contrast to Wright and the Psalms of Lament, the New Testament holds sorrow and comfort together, bound by a confident hope in God's providential goodness amid disaster. Left to ourselves and the burden of our circumstances, we are indeed hopeless, but Christianity hopes for what is not seen and believes in a God who gives life to the dead. Our faith exceeds mere sorrow in ways that are incongruous with reality. Where others see only death and decay, Christians see beyond the grave. Those outside the church grieve for those who will never return. For the Christian, sorrow and hope coexist in ways unimaginable to the world. The dead are those who are asleep but waiting to be awakened by the Lord. Death is not ignored or reduced, but nor is it a one-way street. Instead, our sorrow is transfigured in the hope of the resurrection. Now here's Todd finishes with a really pastoral note. He says, in the midst of a pandemic, it can certainly feel as though God is hidden from us, lurking afar in some other part of the world. It's getting harder every day as more and more people we know, and perhaps we ourselves, get sick. By the way, Todd is in New Jersey, where he's not just whistling Dixie in a place where this isn't happening. But the experience of a distant God is not the same as what God is actually doing. When the horizon of Jesus' life-giving death is forgotten, all one is left with are prayers of lament that place God on trial. Why do you stand far off, O Lord? Why do you hide yourself in time of trouble? Instead, what is known about God is more than what appears to be true right now, that he sent his Son to make all things new. Jesus did not suffer with us, but he suffered for us to overcome death and take away our fear of it. That is who God is and what God is up to now. Now, that is a controversial word in a midst where, and I'm going to reference something that Anne Lowry Forster also wrote for us a few years ago, because there is and I think the three of us are very much advocates of the ministry of presence, that you get in the room and you're with people in the midst of their sorrow. I mean, Sarah, you have that incredible story in Churchy about just showing up when your friend's father died, and you just sit there and you're just there. And that is often so much better than opening your mouth or trying to say something. And yet, to act as though Christianity has only questions and no answers. I think I saw another thing, and it's almost always, frankly, on the left side of the church. It's like, we are not a people of answers, but of questions. Or like, we welcome those who have
Lord Jesus,
questions
I'll
and
just sleep
questions.
in and have brunch in my bed, for God's sake.
I get what they're getting at, though. They want to talk about an openness, and they're not going to come down on you if you're expressing doubt or open-endedness. However, in the midst of a pandemic, I don't actually need more questions.
No,
I need an answer. I need some. Give me.
There's so many questions right now.
Give me something to go on, right?
We don't know if a vaccine's coming. We don't know if we can get it from takeout boxes. I'm worried about the neighbor's dog getting close to me. I don't need more questions, and I certainly don't need them about the risen Lord.
Sarah, come sit with me in your questions, and we will just. Let's walk us alongside each other in our questions. You want to just sometimes
I need a mask and a filter, and I need answers.
Sometimes I understand we might need some space to openly express things, but sometimes, I do not need more questions.
No.
And we laugh, but that's where I'm at, and I want to hear more though from you guys.
Well, but the other thing about, and I love Todd's take on this. The thing that people always bring up for the Psalms and lament, and they're always like, "Oh, this is the place." You can basically bring your questions and not get answers or whatever. And it's like they miss the fact that like every psalm also has this beautiful thing that's basically like, but you are God and I trust in you and I know that you want goodness for me and I know that you love your people. And like, that's also in there, right? And so we need to actually like swim in those waters as well. We need to find our rest there because I can't find rest in questions right now. And I think, we get into these very complicated questions. I mean, I feel like I've said this on the podcast every week I've said it too much and I know that, but this is a very difficult time for y'all who don't preach suffering to your people. It's a very difficult time because you don't know what to say. And if you haven't preached individual suffering, especially, then you really don't know what to say. So if you haven't preached to your people 2 years ago about job loss, divorce, drug addiction, adult children that don't speak to them, then it's real hard now that you've got to kind of pony up and speak about all of those things in the midst of a pandemic. But that's what you have to do. You can't come at them and say, "Oh gosh, well we just, theodicy and more questions." You have to preach. I mean, I just love what Todd says, that it's not that, in some ways it's not even that we suffer with Jesus, it's that Jesus suffers on our behalf. Like, please let me take a nap in that,
It's not
let
just
me find my answers there.
God is not just with us, God is for us.
Yes.
And those if you lose either of those things, I think you've lost a big thing. But
I'm done if I lose either of those things. I'm done.
But the for part is it cannot be. People get so scared of saying it because they don't want to. They don't want God to prove them wrong in some way, or they want to let God off the hook, and they just say, "Well, God is here in your silence." And we just abide.
And people don't want to deal with their sin, Dave. I mean, that's the thing. Is like if you have to say that, if we should say that God is for us, if we have to say that God is suffering on our behalf, then we have to say that we're sinful. And if we've never dealt with that before with the congregation, if we've never talked about sin in that way, then we've never talked about suffering. And here we are having to talk about suffering with no theological context in which to take it on in our congregations. I mean, that's what we're seeing, frankly. I mean, that's where this is going to be very hard for people. So,
Well,
I don't
when
know.
people are talking to Weird Al, they're not saying thank you for being the soundtrack of this terrible thing in my life. They're saying thank you for making that time in my life better.
Yeah. Thank you for rescuing me, is what they're saying,
Yes, giving me permission to eat lots of pizza.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
RJ.
Dave needs a good word. Dave needs a good word about pizza.
I don't mean to.
Eat
I
it.
shouldn't have deflated.
Just eat it.
That's what I hear that though in there. They're not just saying thank you for being with me. They're saying thank you for also being for me and giving me actual voice. RJ, what do you think?
It's interesting. I've been on a bit of an emotional roller coaster with this issue of like lament and joy in the last week and a half or so, because I'm not a natural lamenter.
Mm-mm.
I'm not a mourner.
You're not.
I'm really not. And sometimes I've wondered, like, is there something wrong with me? Am I, because I'm an emotional person.
You?
I'm very emotional.
Totally.
What?
Totally.
Shut up. But I'm not
Like
a
a
mourner.
Pokemon character.
And for the longest time, I thought, well, it's just because no one close to me has died, right? I haven't lost a sibling or a parent. And then my dad died, and I didn't really mourn that much or lament. And it's been a year and a half, and I'm like, well, it'll come. Maybe it will. I don't know. And so I think I was feeling a little conflicted and guilty. And Nathan Hart's email was helpful. And I know, Sarah, like, I know you've been struggling through this
Oh, yeah.
whole time, and I haven't really been. I will say I read the N.T. Wright article, and I thought the T.S. Eliot poem, Waiting Without Hope, I actually used that in my Palm Sunday sermon, because the truth is we can hope for the wrong things sometimes, right?
absolutely.
That's what Palm Sunday, we can hope for the wrong things, we can love the wrong things, we can put our faith in the wrong things, and that's the story of Palm Sunday, right? Expecting Jesus to be something that he's not. And so I found that to be very helpful. But this whole lamenting thing, I guess I have this fear, like, am I just a Pollyanna? Am I just every cloud is a silver lining kind of person? I don't think I am. And so I received Todd's piece as a word of grace to me personally. And I did find, when he quoted Paul, 1 Thessalonians 4:13, he didn't quote him, but he mentioned that verse, and I looked up.
Paul would have failed a pastoral ministry class.
He would have. I mean, here's what he says. We don't want you to be uninformed about those who've died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. So he's basically saying, if you grieve, it's because you're uninformed and you have no hope. Now, I don't want to take that. I would never say that to a grieving person, although apparently the Apostle Paul had no problem doing so. I think where I am right now with it all is what Paul also said in Romans. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. As much as it is up to you, live at peace with all, and just let people feel the way they feel, and to give myself that same grace. To be like, hey, if you're not much of a lamenter, if you're not much of a mourner, that's okay. Don't expect other people to be like you, but also don't beat yourself up for not being more downtrodden than you are. And that's not to say I don't talk about sin and suffering a lot, because I do. And I'm not coming back at you, Sarah, at all.
No, I know.
I do talk about sin and suffering because sin is real in my life, and I have suffered. I'm processing all of this and wondering where I am in all of this. And anyway, like I said, it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but Todd's piece was helpful.
Well,
and made me think.
I also think there's, I mean, RJ, like, you've taken this wonderful new job at this incredible church. There's a lot of exciting things happening in your life.
That's
and
true.
I think that
Yep.
that's, you guys are anticipating a move. You got your oldest is going to go to college. You have your youngest is at that incredible age where they're doing something new and funny and different every single day, and there's so much newness and beauty in a child that age. And I think it kind of reminds me a bit of like a marriage, and how it's very rare that we're both really sad and there's always one of us. And I really do think God has people among us like you who are holding maybe all of the sadness that's happening, but also all these really wonderful things that are happening in your life are maybe a little bit louder, and that we need that too. I mean,
Maybe.
I don't know. I think that there's purpose in not everyone feeling. I hope everyone doesn't feel as crazy and sad as I do right now.
Well, I think there's a fear of that you're invalidating someone's pain by saying anything. And your dear friend and our contributor Ann Lowry Forster, she wrote a piece a
Mhm.
couple years ago. It's called "Say Something," talking about one of her own children who had undergone a very intense surgery. And
Yeah.
she said that there's a great idea that's been articulated recently in our landscape, the idea of a ministry of presence. You don't have to say anything at all. Ye who are paralyzed by your fear of saying the wrong thing, you can just be. And this is so true. Weeping with those who weep often means exactly that. Keeping your mouth shut and being present can be very much a gift. However, God created through the spoken word. He revealed himself with a whole bunch of words, and at the climax of history, the God man did not die in silent dignity. He cried, "It is finished." The work of
Mhm.
redemption would have been completed, of course, if Christ had not said a thing, but aren't we so glad that he did? God loves words, and so do his people. Words are of great value, and silence is not always the answer. Then she gave her sort of 5 tips of things you can say to someone who's grieving, which are, I
Mhm.
am aware, I am willing, I am praying, and you are
Mm.
precious. And then the
Mm.
fifth thing would be, I am still here, I am still aware, still willing, and still praying. I thought that was just
Mm.
in the midst of this chasm of like, let's just sit in our pain and give each other the grace to express the pain, which is a very true ministry to other people. It's not as though the voice from the heavens doesn't occasionally also shout back, and what it has shouted back in Jesus Christ Himself is um, is Easter Sunday. So. Um,
Yes.
and I was struck by it in the midst of there was an interview with Kate Bowler in the New York Times of how to live in the face of fear, lessons from a cancer survivor. Bowler, who teaches at Duke, and has become a bit of a social media presence. She was asked in this interview what is revealing about the collective soul of the country or the world right now, and she said, "I think it's painful for everyone to know that there's just not a lot of room between anybody and the very edge. It really does run counter to the whole American story. It's a story about how scrappy individuals will always make it, and it's a story about how Americans' collective self-understanding will always build something that will save the nation. And currently, both things are not true. Everyone else in the world will suffer too. But I don't think they will suffer nearly the same cultural disillusionment because they don't have the same amount of exceptionalism." Well, what do you make of the idea, the interviewer asked, that we should all just stay positive through this? The idea that we're all supposed to be positive at a time like this has become an American obsession. It gives us momentum and purpose to feel like the best is yet to come. But the problem is when it becomes a kind of poison in which it expects that people who are suffering, which is pretty much everyone right now, are somehow always supposed to find the silver lining or not speak realistically about their circumstances. And in that sense, we are advocating for lament. That's me talking. But she goes, the main problem is that staying positive adds shame to suffering by just requiring everyone to be prescriptively joyful. If I see one
Mm.
more millionaire on Instagram yell that she is choosing joy while selling journals in which stay-at-home moms are supposed to write joy mantras, I'm going to lose my mind. I have no expectation, and then she talks about prayer. I have no expectation that prayer works in a direct way, but I do hope that every person, religious or not, feels the permission to say, I'm at the edge of what I know, and in the face of the sea of abyss, someone out there, please show me love. Because that's, to me, the only thing that fills up the darkness. Now, what she's not saying, I don't think, or what I'm not hearing, is that prayer in a time of pandemic is simply the act of saying, screaming into the void, please love me. Because she's also allowing for the fact that sometimes the void answers back. And to approach, sometimes what I hear behind these endorsements of lament is a failure a lack of faith that God will ever actually respond with anything like grace or comfort or, in fact,
Or actual
salvation,
healing.
actual healing,
Yeah.
God actually present
Yeah.
in the world. It's almost
Yes.
like
Yes.
it feels almost deistic sometimes, that
Yeah.
understanding of lament, when we believe that, yes, life is pain, human beings inflict terrible things on one another and themselves,
Mhm.
and yet God also has not just entered into that, but has redeemed it, has suffered it. And I'll read a final article before we're done, but before I do, what do you think about that, Kate? Kate Bowlers.
Well, I keep thinking like there's not actually a song that starts off with like I have so many questions. and then that's just the end. That's the joke in my head. But I
It's not just a
I
series of
love
question marks.
it's just like I have, yeah, and then it's just a series of questions. I have so many questions. I I just want to keep going because it's like I don't really believe in you, God. What do you think? Question mark. You know what I mean? Like,
WTF? That's the whole psalm.
I love what she says about American exceptionalism and this idea of we think everything is gonna and she's so right though, and it's totally gonna happen. Everyone's gonna be like, everything is gonna be even better now. And this idea of like what if the best is yet to come, and I do think like what if the best has already happened? I don't know, there's a part of me that like wonders that, because I do think fundamentally when we transition back into what is beyond this, it sounds like it's going to have to be different, at least for a time. And so, but then I also think like, what if our version of what the best is so misconstrued and so individualistic, that what if this time is kind of us actually figuring out what the best is? I don't know. Like, I do think some of that is like happening, certainly, in our relationships with the people that we're living with, if we're lucky enough to have people in the house with us. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how this will be optimized. And I'm already kind of wary of that, even now. I mean, Instagram is a difficult place to be at certain moments right now, because there is this like, oh my God, there was a meme that went around that's like, have you prayed about it as much as you've complained about it? Did you guys see that? And I was like, no, actually I could complain a lot more. I don't know. I just was like, oh my God.
I'm going for the record.
No one's praying after they read this record. So, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, Dave, I really do like cling to what you said. Like, no one's doing this no one's doing this right. Like, there's so much mercy and grace for us to be found in that, and to be found in, I mean, I don't know, to be found in Easter. Like, I keep thinking about, we're all in the same sort of liturgical boat where Easter lasts for 50 days. And that feels like a real gift right now. Like, that feels like a real transition right now. And I don't know if that's just my brain kind of trying to optimize like New Year's resolutions. But like today, I felt better, and I took a walk before the podcast, and I thought and prayed about the fact that I actually believe that Jesus can enact real healing in our lives, real physical healing in our lives, real emotional healing in our lives, and that I'm really clinging to that right now, for myself and for people I know who are sick, and for people I know who are pastoring churches in New York City. And I don't know. I mean, that's kind of where I am.
The part of this article I liked the most, that I resonated the most with, was when she talked about having a morning plan and an evening plan. Because I'm not a lamenter, but I am a worrier. And when I wake up in the morning, first thing, usually pretty early, the first thought that runs through my head is something that I need to get done. The first emotion I usually have is worry, is anxiety. But my morning plan is, okay, set it aside, go make the coffee, take a shower, have a cup of coffee, and see how you feel,
Yeah.
and sort of, I've done enough mindfulness stuff just to sort of hopefully let emotions, not try to chase them away or hold on to them, but to realize that I'll feel differently 20 minutes from now than I do at this moment. And then the same thing at night. I think my wife and I, we often break this rule, but we have found it's not a great idea to have any kind of serious conversation after a certain hour, because it's just not going anywhere good. Wait for the next day. So I found that to be helpful and true, just to know yourself well enough to recognize that when you have some of these negative emotions, to be good to yourself, and to find things that will bring you joy and peace, and not just sort of increase the negativity. And then in terms of answered prayer, my thought on that, Dave and Sarah, as you were speaking, is that, I'm saying this to myself, that I never believe that God will show up until he actually does. Like, I just don't, you know? And then he does, and it's a miracle. It's like, oh my gosh, God does actually answer prayer. God does actually care about me. God will actually and is actually providing for my needs and the needs of my family in a way that I could have never possibly imagined. And my hope is that as I get older and I encounter more seemingly impossible moments, because I know there's going to be more of them, that I'll be able to remember, the 3 or 4 or 5 times when I was like, how am I going to get out of this? There's no way God's going to show up. And to remember, but he did, but he did, but he did. And that will make whatever the current catastrophe is a little bit more bearable. That I'll be able to find a little bit more peace and hope in the midst of those difficult times. So, because it's true, because God has been really good to me.
Wow. Well, I can attest to that truth in your life. Just kidding. Not kidding. Not kidding. Aren't we all self-saboteurs in certain ways?
Yes.
And I think I want to say one last thing. I think that the permission to lament often is directed at those, and it comes off as total grace to those who are raised in a church context or a faith context where they were told they were never allowed to express a negative emotion to God.
Yes.
And therefore ended up having a highly edited or curated prayer life in which any kind of fear was seen as a lack of faith, or it was rather than a sign of authenticity. And to that, we want to say, lament to your heart's content. God can take it. It is you are free to really let him have it. Where it is tipped over as a reaction, as an emotional reaction to a real reality, is when people say that that's all that there is in that moment is to lament. Because the truth is, we're not just a religion of questions, but there are some answers, not often in the ways we would prefer there to be. But the cross is a revelation of God. Easter Sunday, the empty tomb is an actual statement in history. And in fact, what this was brought home to me, and we'll close with this, is a very powerful reflection from a new writer named Josh Musser-Gritter, who wrote a piece called When Jesus Got Infected. And he's writing about Luke 5 when Jesus deals with a leper. And he talks about leprosy being, in infection, contagious. This is the ultimate contagion here. That the man was covered in leprosy. And the verse says, Jesus, if you choose, you can make me clean. At first, Jesus does not speak, Josh writes. And then he does something unthinkable, unimaginable. I will never read those words the same way again after this pandemic. And those words are, then Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. This is Musser-Gritter speaking. As the foggy sadness of unknowing haunts me, as I stare at my Bible feeling absolutely incapable to find a word to say to my weary congregation, I imagine Jesus standing there in front of me. My head is bowed to the ground in shame, like that leper, in guilt, in powerlessness. I am lonely and covered in fear and anxiety, begging for answers. And then Jesus reaches out his hand and he touches me. He touches all of us. Touches our despair, touches our isolation, touches our attempt to do the pandemic better than others. Apparently, there is one for whom social distancing does not apply. Maybe our prayer for today could simply be, Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean. And the good news is that he does choose. The bad news for Jesus is that touching us will come at an immeasurable cost to God. We have now become familiar enough with the pandemic protocols to know that what will happen to Jesus when he touches all that now infects us. He too will be infected. Jesus will feel it all, become it all. This is not just the story of the healing of a sick man. It is also the story of the spread of a disease to God. It was an early church father who said, Christ cannot redeem that which he does not taste. Well, now Jesus gets a golden corral buffet-sized taste of human brokenness. Jesus is covered in disease, covered in uncleanness, covered in sin. It's everywhere. He will carry the virus we gave him all the way to Calvary. But there on the cross, this virus doesn't have a snowball's chance. For the last enemy to be defeated is death. Death and all of its symptoms. Take heart, friends. Jesus will not quarantine himself from you.
So good.
Amen to that. Maybe who knows what'll happen from this quarantine? Maybe Weird Al will write an incredible album.
He hasn't already.
Had to bring it full circle.
That's
I
right.
mean,
We'll talk to you guys soon. Blessings to
Great
all
to
of
talk
you
to you
in the
guys.
midst of this.
You as well, Dave.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.